to episode 70 of Lean in Leander and the first interview in the Vote in Leander series with our guest host, Mogan Tuttle.
Hi, welcome back everybody. My name is Mogan Tuttle and we're here again at Lantern Media Studio. And I'm here again with Andrew for my first ever hosting of Lean in Leander for the Vote in Leander series.
Hey, Morgan, thanks. That's a bit of a role reversal for me here, but I appreciate what you're doing here to make sure that we keep this public service, if you will, going, because I think it's going to be important to talk to the candidates, and I just happen to be one of them this time. So that's the only thing that's really changed.
Yeah, well, and then me being in this seat.
Well, that's true too. Those are the two things that have really changed.
All right. Well, Andrew, thank you for having me here and giving me the opportunity to host this. I will let you know that I apologize in advance. I'm not used to being in this seat, so I'll be muddling through as best as I can.
No, it's all good. It's all good. I mean, you're gonna be perfectly fine with this, and I think it'll help demonstrate a little bit. I mean, selfishly, it's not that easy.
It's not. Like it sounds all fun and games, but as soon as you sit in front of the microphone, you're like, okay, what do I say?
Yeah, what do I say? How do I say this, right? Yeah, no, it's all good. I'm perfectly confident that you're going to be really good at this. So
cool. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right, so I guess we'll start with a couple of questions. We'll get the basics out of the way.
Okay.
I guess tell me a little bit about your background and where you're from.
Okay, so Texas, born and raised. Right, I was born in El Paso, Texas. Formative youth out there, and then I did some time at the University of Texas, El Paso. Bounced around a little bit, went back and forth between California and Texas, and then eventually ended up in Houston, where I met my wife, and that was weird because she was from Ohio, and that. Houston's a big city, right? Yeah. So you have a lot more propensity, I suppose, to meet people from other places, yeah. Right? So, so we met, and then, we quickly started a family and raised my kids out there. 25, 28 some odd years, something like that. I could probably go back and do the math. I just never have. Yeah. So... around the time that we became empty nesters, our kids were off to college, and my wife and I were thinking about moving into town, like into Houston, from the suburbs. And then she had an opportunity. The company that she was working with at that time had offices in Houston and Austin, and they decided to consolidate all their offices to Austin. So we ended up here. There was really nothing keeping us in Houston. I really didn't have any family or anything like that. I mean, a lot of friends, but it just seemed like a good opportunity to kind of change things up and shake it up. So we ended up coming out here. We originally started to look and actually started to build a house in Georgetown.
Okay.
But then our house in Houston didn't sell. So we kind of got stuck for a little bit, and I was in Houston. My wife was out here in Austin, and while we were building that house, she would drive back and forth at work, right? Yeah. And then one day she calls me, she says, "Hey, that's too far. I don't want to live that far from town," right? Yeah. So we kind of came back around, started doing some additional tours, and our realtor brought us out to Leander. And we'd looked at a few areas, and then I decided to drive down Lakeline for whatever reason. There was some signs or something like that. Oh, let's go over here and take a look. And at that time, this was about 7 years ago, there wasn't as much development out towards that end of Hero. Mm-hmm. And so we found our place, right? It just kind of spoke to us, and we ended up buying and moving and settling here in Leander, like I said, about 7 years ago. So nice. That's what brought me here. I've been, working a couple different things here in Austin. I've always been in sales. Mm-hmm. And so when I got to Austin, I had to kind of figure out a new network. And so I tried a few different things there, mostly in the tech sector. I did a little bit of venture capital work and some incubator work. I worked with the Alzheimer's Association for a while, and then ended up finding my current job, which is in the communication sector. Okay. And I work with like a data group there. So we do data analyst stuff.
Sounds exciting.
It can be. I mean, it's interesting when you start digging into stuff, right?
Yeah.
Um, you never know what you're going to find, but yeah, no, it pays the bills.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Cool. And so why Leander, not like Cedar Park?
The type of home that we were looking for, we wanted something that was a little bit closer to, a good transportation center, and the train was really one of our decision-making processes, right? So when we were looking in Leander, and it became apparent to us that that was an option, right? Then it really kind of started us thinking. It's like, oh, you could easily, instead of having to drive all the way into town every day, you could go and take the train, and you have some time to get ready every day. About we learned that it was about an hour ride, and that appealed to both of us, right?
Yeah.
More so my wife, because she was the one who was actually working in Austin, and at the time I was working from home, so it really wasn't that much of an issue for me. But when we got out here, we were able to get a lot more than what we had expected for our money. And still be relatively close to the city, right?
Yeah.
Central Texas is real different
Yeah.
from Houston. It's a completely different way of living and a completely different way of approaching a lot of things, right? Because we grew up in, and raised our kids in Houston. Like we were literally for the first few years of my kid's life, we were in Houston, like inside the loop.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of urban environment is it's different.
Yeah.
It's way different. But that was really one of the main reasons. Again, it's just it was easy use of the train. And at the time when we bought our house, it was a really undeveloped area.
Yeah.
And there was this wonderful pasture behind us, right?
Not anymore, huh?
Not anymore. No, not anymore.
Yeah.
We were right up against the property line there, right? Yeah. So we knew there was always going to be some green space behind us, which was a decision.
Yeah.
But at the time, we're like, well, as long as we can have this pasture. There was a period of time when we first moved in where we'd get up on any random weekend and, it'd be a longhorn sitting there right outside of our fence, right? Just looking at us. That and the deer, you'd see the deer, gallop through there.
We have some horses near ours.
Yeah.
There's a couple of little areas, but they're, their area now that seems really small, and I'm not sure they're going to be there for too much longer.
No, we have the same thing with the cattle because there's actually still an area in our subdivision where technically they can run the cattle. They're out there every once in a while, but mostly they're on the other side of Lakeline now.
Yeah.
So they got land over there. Whoever the landowner is there, I think it's the Gilpin family. Mm-hmm. They have ranch land on both sides, and then over on Lakeline. So. Yeah, it was cool while it lasted. Yeah. It's not bad to have neighbors back there, right? What is it? It's Rosenbaugh, the Rosenbaugh development. It's really nice. They've done a really good job with that development. So it's nice. It's nice to have those neighbors, and we're kind of expanding our circle kind of thing. So
yeah, we're over by off of Crystal Falls, close to Ronald Reagan, and I loved the area. It was a new development. It's kind of why we moved out here. A little bit more space. You get kind of that good mix of rural but suburban.
Yeah.
But now it's getting really developed. There's a lot of businesses and things going in, and it's definitely the vibe has definitely changed.
And it will. Yeah. I mean, that's progress. That's just kind of what happens after time, right? I mean, you can make the choice as a homeowner. If you really want the more rural kind of experience, well, you can move out. You can move further out, and it's not the most ideal situation to be in, obviously. But if that's what you're looking for, it's a nice thing about being in an area where development is relatively newer, kind of sort of speaking, right? I mean, people have obviously been living out here in the greater Austin area for a while, but some of this more suburban type development is a little bit newer out here.
Yeah.
And, we lived in we lived in Cypress, Texas for the most part. Like, again, first few years in Houston, and then we were like, okay, big city. Kids started to go to school, and we're like, we're really not too sure about that. So we moved out to the Cy-Fair Independent School District, which was, very well regarded. And we're like, okay, our kids are going to be in public schools. So that's one of the reasons we moved out there. And we saw it out there. We kind of saw something similar, right? Because Cypress is kind of I want to say it's an unincorporated area. It's not like ETJ. It's not like out here, right? But there was no municipal leadership, right? It was just stuff happened. I just went back this past weekend and was kind of surprised at some of the development that's actually taken place. To your point, progress happens and new stuff gets built, and people want the things and the conveniences is the word I'm looking for. The conveniences of life, right, near them, and so that's going to happen, right?
I mean, as long as there's an HEB and a good sushi place, within good driving distance,
right?
I'm happy.
Right. Well, and you're not. I mean, that's what most people will like. What are you looking for? Like, what are the conveniences of life that you're looking for? And so, you want a good mix. I would say, for me personally, I was like, I want a good mix. I want stuff that's, the sandwich shops that I'm used to going to, but also, a nice local restaurant, that type of thing. Try to get a good mix in there. But yeah, those are generally the things that people, I think, are looking for the place to live. But my point being is that in Cypress, what we saw was like a lot of growth really quick without any zoning and just stuff going up everywhere, right? There was no plan, right? And when I moved out here to Leander, I was keenly aware of that, right? Because I could see, I had the experience of looking at like, okay, I've just lived through this for the last 20-something years. I get here and I'm like, okay, wait, you guys are like 15 years behind where I started, right? So I was like, okay, I've seen this happen before. Not exactly the same, but I've seen those types of development issues and the growing pains. And I was like, okay, this is something I probably want to maybe see if I can help, right? Yeah. It's kind of one of the first things that kind of motivated me to start talking to people, who were involved with city planning and development and whatnot, and see what I could do, volunteer for commissions and things of that nature. So it was always kind of intentional out here. It's just been something that I decided I wanted to do early on, is just be involved and see what I could do to help, right?
Yeah, and that kind of leads into the next question. So you've been here for, you said 7 years.
Yep.
How come you've just now decided to, run for office this election cycle?
I mean, it's probably the question because of what I've done before. So, if I take a look at it from that perspective and just being real forthright and transparent, when I first came to Leander, there was an election underway, right? And I saw a bunch of election signs and this guy running against that guy and whatever. And I was like, okay, what's going on here? So I kind of quickly studied what was happening in the local politics, and I thought, again, I want to get involved, but I don't know where to start. So let me try to start to get on some commissions and things of that nature. And at first, there was a little bit of resistance because I hadn't been here long enough, right? And so I ran into a little bit of, well, you have to live for a certain amount of time before you can really, jump in and get involved and whatnot, which I thought was kind of silly, but I'm like, okay, hey, I don't know, and I don't know what I don't know, so, try to learn and inform myself. And so I did some work with the Chamber of Commerce, because I think that's where I really was able to get into the first commission, right? And it was a Chamber of Commerce Economic Development Commission, right? So really didn't have any direct impact on anything, right? It was more of a think tank sort of idea. But there were some really, really good people there, so it gave me an opportunity to start meeting some of the people who get involved in these things, right? Some of the, I don't know if you'd call them movers and shakers, but
that was the exact term in my head.
So that's kind of where that started. And I thought, I'm going to familiarize myself with the issues. I'm going to familiarize myself with, what's going on in the city, and so that I can be, at least somewhat knowledgeable as to, what the parameters of those issues are, right? And then I just kept continuing to volunteer my time on boards and commissions. I was on the Ethics Commission. I was eventually on the city's Economic Development Committee, which I renamed to an advisory because, I was elected chair at a point, and I said, what, we have to be what it is that we are instead of trying to be something that we're not, right? And economic development committees are different in a lot of cities. And here in Leander, this was an idea that to start an economic development committee with the anticipation of some other issues kind of falling into place. And when those didn't, then that committee kind of became, for lack of better terms, it just didn't have any real guidance. It had no vision, right? And so, but we were really determined. It was a determined group of people, and I was, honored with the selection of chair, because we needed someone to kind of lead the ship, right? And we did some good work. I thought, I thought we really worked hard to find issues that we could provide some advisory direction to the city, to the council. We were under no illusions that we were going to change anything per se, right?
Yeah.
But we were like, there's a few things that we can address and we can help and we can at least give some outlines and some ideas. And I think we did a pretty good job of that. But yeah, that's kind of how this has all come about. And the podcast was part of that too, right? Because at the time, and this was 4 years ago now, with the podcast, I just felt that there was a gap in the conversation, right? There were these people who were getting involved in being either committee members or running for council, whatever, and I didn't know who they were, right? I was like, well, they're just people. It's a volunteer position, right?
Right.
You're not running for, a paid public position or anything like that. You're running to represent people in the community.
Yeah.
But there was nobody talking to these folks, right? I mean, yeah, there's forums and whatnot, but I was like, there needs to be more of a conversation, just one-on-one, like what we're doing here, that hopefully frames it in a way that, shows the human side of things a little bit more. I like to think I was fairly successful with it. I mean, on the podcast, we've interviewed pretty much every candidate except for two in the last 3 election cycles.
Yeah. And I was here helping you for the last
You
one.
were.
Yeah.
It was really kind of because there was a home studio effort initially, right? And I was out there with my iPhones and getting some video and
Isn't this so much nicer?
Oh, it's so much nicer. You have no idea. I mean, just the fact that I'm able to, the audio quality and whatnot. I mean, and the truth with the podcast is that we started with a video, YouTube, Facebook kind of approach, and eventually added the podcast part. And the podcast part kind of had a little bit more momentum, which is what drove me to the studio, because I was like, if I can improve the audio quality, it'll help with the podcast, right? And it does. It's such a big difference.
Yeah. It sets it apart from.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
podcasts.
And you were kind enough to give me an opportunity to do that, right? Because it's not for free, right? And I, as much as I'd like to think I could monetize the podcast, I'm not making a whole lot of money off the podcast. It's in the dollars. It's not even the tens of dollars, right? So, it's a labor of love from my perspective, and it's just something that I do, I think, as a community service. And it was really important, the point of you being here today and hosting is because I'm a candidate. It doesn't mean that that's still not important, right? And I still want that to happen. Yeah. And hopefully the other candidates will take advantage of that.
Yeah, I think it's great that you're actually still doing this, even though you're running. You could just be like, you know what, you guys are on your own,
Right.
I'm not going to give you any airtime.
Well, no, I think it's important. And it's not an us versus them or anything like that,
Sure.
I think it's important to provide this information for people who actually go and vote or who are going to consider going to vote, right?
Absolutely.
We're not so big that there's still a lot of small town things that we can do. And to be honest, the podcast is one of those things, right? I mean, I could easily have already expanded it beyond Leander. It's hard to find topics all the time, right?
Yeah.
Outside of the voting stuff is easy from that perspective because it's, at least it's topical and it's timely. But yeah, no, I hope that people view it as a public service because that's how it's intended.
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely a good thing you're doing.
Well, you are a friendly audience, so.
I try. So, so I guess that kind of, again, another lead into, kind of what you feel your unique qualifications and experiences are that you will bring to your hopeful position.
Part of it is preparation. I've spent the last several years here in Leander, very intentionally, by the way. One of the first things that I did when I got here was I was very intentional about meeting my neighbors. I wanted to know who they were. I wanted to know their names. I wanted to introduce them to where, the approach was, hey, I'm the guy you can get a cup of sugar from if you need it, right? That was the whole idea.
Yeah.
And so, I made a very, very conscious effort to try to meet a lot of my neighbors. And I do know a good number of the people in my neighborhood by name. And if not by name, by, at least they know who I am, right? They'll recognize me as being one of the neighbors. Which is nice because there are situations where, hey, I need some flour, whatever, right? And especially like when we hit COVID, it slowed the process down, but at the same time, it kind of solidified some of those relationships, right? Because it was people that were in our neighborhood that we had only known a short period of time, a year or two, right? And they were able to come to us. They were able to come to our home or ask us, pick up the phone and ask us if they needed anything, and we were always happy to help. My wife and I, and both are kind of committed to that. Yeah. My wife started to volunteer at some of the food pantries out here and some of that stuff too, because she has that same kind of community orientation. She goes about it a little bit different. She does less visible things from her perspective, but we're both kind of oriented that way.
Sure.
But yeah, that is one part of it is that like that intentionality, if you will, of making the effort to be involved and for reasons that are very altruistic. It's not about me. It's about making sure that my world is informed and is as communicative as possible with the people who are around me, and that includes my neighbors. I think we lose a lot of that in society today. We get away from that, and sometimes it's the development that actually does that. You have a lot of new developments come up, and for good reason. And I'm not saying it's a wrong or a right. It's not a bad or a good. It's just what they do, right? They build walls, right? Yeah. And so you end up with these subdivisions, and there's these walls between people, and it starts to create barriers to communication, right? Yeah. So you have to be intentional to get around those. Yeah. So that's one thing, the intentionality. And the other thing is just, again, just by taking the time to learn the things, right? Because there's a lot of things. And I will readily admit, I don't know all of them. I don't. But anytime I try to get into any one particular area of communication, as far as municipal topics are concerned, I try to make sure and do as much homework as I possibly can, right? And I try to get as many perspectives as I possibly can. And as a candidate, and as if elected as a council member, that is something that I really want to emphasize. I think that it's absolutely critical for us in Leander to build bridges of communication between communities, right? Because there's a lot of diversity out here, no matter which way you cut it, right? And I know that word gets a little, a little topical right now, but the diversity of the population is apparent. It's easy to see. I mean, all you have to do is go to HEB, right?
Or my neighborhood.
Which is next to HEB, right?
Very
so,
close,
I mean, seriously, but and we joke a little bit, but I mean that. You go to like your grocery stores, your larger grocery stores, and your specialty grocery stores. It tells you the story of your community, right? When you have literally specialty stores that are selling items to a particular culture or particular background, those people live there because they need those conveniences that we were talking about at the top, right? For them, it's more about being able to get, halal or, kosher or whatever it might be, right? As opposed to, I don't know, Chuck E. Cheese. I mean, it's just different, but it's the same, right?
Yeah.
Those two things can be true at the same time. So that's one of the things that I think I bring, and again, a sensibility on the topics that is very grounded. Everybody has their opinions, and everybody's entitled to their opinions, and there's always going to be perspectives on things that are going to differ, right? I like to try to be the person who is willing to listen to all of those perspectives with a real simple precursor. It's help me understand. Help me understand why you think that. Help me understand why you feel that way. Help me understand why that is important to you. And as a representative, and in the true sense of representative government, it's not my decision, right? It's my job, or my intentionality is to take in all of those opinions and come up with something that everybody can be happy with. Knowing, of course, that you're not going to get everybody on board,
But I personally think that is a trait that not very many people have these days, is, listening to others' points of views. And, I won't say everybody, but, there's a lot going on right now where people, they have an idea in their head that, what they think is right, and they don't listen to anybody else, and they do what they want to do without any input from anybody else. And I think it's getting more rare for, people like you who actually want to listen to others, and then, provide everybody with all of that input.
Yeah. Again, it's, you always want to be open to conversation, right?
Right.
Because we are a social species. We're wired like that, right? That's the reason we've been as successful as a species as we have, is because we're a social creature, right? And again, I'm tech adjacent, if not directly in the tech industry, right? So I'm always really kind of attuned to some of the things that are going on, and there's a lot of benefits, and there's a lot of, I'd say probably a 50-50 equation as far as, good and bad as far as tech is concerned. I think a lot of the stuff that we see today was not necessarily intentional, but has become monetized, right? So, the ideas of creating communication and an ability to find information very quickly and to expand on the amount of information that's available, all those are really, really good ideas. I think what ended up happening is that the way that it was being consumed very quickly became something that, a lot of the tech industry leaders realized very quickly that was that they could make money off of that, right? People's attention. That's what's been monetized, right? Our attention, like the time that you spend on, whether it's social medias or just, entertaining yourself on your phone or whatever it is, right? It's always about getting your eyeballs and having your eyeballs somewhere. And if you remember, when we first started this whole process, it was all free, right? You could just do it for hours. And hey, I'm just going to look at them and look at these, and you'd go into these, down these rabbit holes of just stuff, right? And then people figured, okay, you know what? I can commercialize this. I can put, I can sell the data, all that stuff, and that's when it changed. To the detriment of our communities, I think, in my opinion, humbly submitted, speaking strictly for myself. It's created a situation where people are, and it's kind of it. So there's a couple of things that happened, I think, that started this, right?
Sure.
All right. First was the car, right? Because before automobiles, you were much more community oriented because you had to be, right? But in an automobile, you had private time. You could privatize your time, right? And then televisions. Right. So then televisions allowed us to be able to entertain ourselves in our own homes. Right. So we're no longer necessarily required to go out. Right. And there was a period of time where people would throw dinner parties so they could entertain and meet their friends and neighbors and get people together. Right. You just don't see that anymore. It's not done because our entertainment now is we go home and we isolate and we enjoy whatever entertainment we enjoy for ourselves. And occasionally we'll have a few folks over, whatever, right? But for the most part, it's privatized, right? So those two things start to take away from community engagement, right? And that is something that I think as a city, you need to actively work against that, right? You have to create opportunities for those who are inclined to be, socially engaged and community oriented. You give them those opportunities. I think it would be great if the city were to create opportunities for conservation, for example, right? And it's simple stuff like, let's have a citywide, flower planting day or, a citywide garbage pickup day, whatever, right? And organize these things, leveraging existing community organizations, because there's already organizations that do these types of things. Let's just coordinate it as a city and let's get everybody, or as many people as we could, involved in that. And I think that that would have a very positive effect on what we're talking about, which is the isolation that people end up in and the way that people pull away into their own communities. Because something like, something as simple as trash, that's offensive to most people, period, right? Like you don't like to walk down your street and have a bunch of trash on your sidewalk, right? That bothers most people, right? So let's find those people who are going to say, you know what, I'll take a trash bag and I'll go pick that up. And let's get about 20 of them together and do that times 10, right? Then you have 200 people around the community doing the same thing, cleaning up the streets and helping to beautify the city, right? And I'd love to see the city kind of get behind those kinds of ideas and really kind of provide community-centric opportunities. Not to say that they don't do it now. It's different. What I'm talking about is different from what we do. And I'm not saying that what we do now is not good. It is. But it's more entertainment and less involvement. And I'd like to see a little bit more involvement.
Okay. Cool. So next question. What specific policies do you think Leander should be focusing on?
Policies are a little bit different, right? Because, policies require planning, right? So if you're going to look at a couple of things right now, I would say, from my perspective, we look at, everybody's going to talk about water because water is an issue, right? And how we're approaching our infrastructure as far as water is concerned today is something that we're making up for lost time, right? There's a number of reasons why that happened, right? And I'm not so, I understand them, I think, from the perspective of, hey, the city growth was exponential. No one could have planned for that. Like, this is just not something you can plan for, right? No one expected that. And so it got away from any city leaders who were there during that time. And they may not have known how to, or they may not have had the wherewithal, or we may not have had the staffing to be able to deal with those things. But we've changed a lot of those parameters, and we're working to being able to resolve that, which is great, right? There's still a lot more work to be done, right? And there's other things that we need to start considering on a more holistic perspective. So from a policy perspective, I'd say we need to start looking at how we're addressing long-term water usage and the accompanying, how do I phrase this? The accompanying perspective of fire hazard as a result of drought, prolonged drought periods, right? If you want to call it climate change, you can call it climate change. But the reality of it is we are not getting as much water as we used to naturally. We have manipulated the water resources to a point to where, it's a distribution model now for the most part, right? And that resource is less than what it was than when we started. All you have to do is look at the lakes, right? Yeah. It's very obvious. And so you have to be able to plan for those things, and you have to be able to plan for those things at the same time. So that gets into the responsibilities of the council, which the council is responsible for primarily two things, budgeting and ordinances, right? So those two tools need to be used concurrently to ensure that the long-term growth and the long-term sustainability of our community is being addressed with a forward-thinking policy, right? We can't continue to come to this and make, 3 to 5 year changes and solutions, right? They have to be more long-term. And that's going to require some conversation with the community. People are going to have to understand that, our tax base will increase. And so where we're spending our money, we need to spend our money on things that are going to assure that the people who live in Leander, here now, in the short-term future and in the long-term future, have a community that can sustain them in a very comfortable way and give them the quality of life that they're looking for. So that would be one. I mean, that's one policy. I think there's a couple of other places that potentially go. I think one of the things we actually need to look at is infrastructure. If you look at infrastructure, there's a number of projects that will be coming online here shortly. One of those projects is the expansion of Hero Way. And when you look at Hero Way, there's a lot of tributaries into Hero Way. That starts to affect that, right? And the traffic, the increase of traffic on those tributaries will speed up the degradation of the infrastructure, right? And we need to look at that. We need to be prepared for that. We need to find the mechanisms, whatever they may be. And I don't have all the answers, but we need to start looking at what are those mechanisms that are going to ensure that those roads that we drive to the conveniences that we want are such that we're not, bitching and moaning the whole time about all the potholes or whatever it might be. When we go to our local grocery store or favorite fast food place, right? We want a community that can support that type of long-term planning and growth. And so from a policy perspective, that would be the overriding theme there would be, a more of a long-term policy look. Like, what are we doing? Not now, not 5 years from now, but 10, 15, and 20 years from now. How do we affect that?
Yeah. So if you're elected, how do you envision implementing these to address the needs of the community?
Twofold. It's a good question. I think the first part of that is understanding the communication portion that we were talking about earlier and the outreach to the community so that we get the engagement that we want, right? You can look at many episodes and a more recent episode of Lean and Leander, and I talk about that, right? You have a population of about 80,000 people, roughly. It's probably a little bit more than that now. But you have a voting group on any election, 7,000 people, and that's just not enough, right? That's just not enough. We shouldn't allow ourselves as a community to become so disengaged that we don't take the time to opine on the things that are going to affect us directly, right? There's a lot of what I call well, let me rephrase this. We need to be local rather than focal.
Yeah.
Right? There's a lot of noise in the world that's focal, right? Then they're focusing on things and they're there's topics that are coming up and there's conversations that are created and they don't necessarily impact you on a day-to-day basis, right? Yeah. They're big ideas, they're big conversations. Right or wrong, however you want to look at that, that's a different way of what you're looking at when you're looking at your local issues, right? And I think we've lost track of that over time. We've allowed that to be kind of taken away from us as local participants in our cities. Mm-hmm. How our neighbors feel is important. How our subdivisions all work together is important, right?
Well, that actually, I was just thinking, that's actually a problem that even comes down to our subdivision, our neighborhood level. We have over 400 houses in our neighborhood, and trying to get enough turnout for voting for our HOA, for things that we need to do and fix, nobody shows up until something blows up and people get mad. Then all of a sudden everybody comes out, but then it's like, we've been asking for volunteers for the last 6 months. Feel free, sign up. We'd love you to come and help. And at first they're excited to actually, be able to affect change, and then it fades away and people get involved in their own stuff and don't want to deal with it.
Well, it's kind of what I was talking about earlier. I mean, you're highlighting that issue, right?
Exactly.
People have become much more isolated in their day-to-day life from a community perspective than has ever been the case in the world, right? Mm-hmm. They say that there's like an epidemic of loneliness, right? But I when I think about that and conversations that I've had and information that I've sought out, I've kind of come to the conclusion that yes, there is a loneliness issue. There's an issue there, right? There's something that's probably affecting our youth more than anything else, but that's a different topic, right? But there's a self-isolation issue, right? And again, it kind of goes to the fact that how much time you spend with your own devices in your own world, looking at the things that you want to look at, and your attention is being diverted. And then you go home and you're entertained in a way that, I mean, you can have first run movies now on 80-inch televisions with high end sound bars, and you don't need to go to the movies. You don't need to go out into your community. And so the point I'm trying to make is that's why I'm saying what I'm saying, is that it's important to create an awareness there and really, really emphasize it. Whether, again, is it something, and I don't know the answer. I don't. I may not, it may not be possible either, but it's something that we should be talking about. How does the city as a municipality, how do we make sure that our people are involved, that our communities are engaged, and that they're participating, right? How do we create those opportunities for participation? And maybe it's as simple as supporting awareness of your HOAs, right? I mean, maybe there's something as simple as that can be done. Mm-hmm. People look for information. It's very fragmented in the environments that exist now on purpose because people are trying to make money off of that, right? And they're not going to make it easy to kind of bring all things together. But I would argue that in the truest sense of, again, representative government and what government should be doing for you, government should be providing that resource, if nothing else, right? Helping you as a citizen find the things that you need to find in order to take action within your communities. And again, I don't know that that's something that we can do as a city, but I do think it's something that we should be talking about. And maybe there are private organizations, maybe there are community organizations, 501c3 nonprofits that have those same ideas, that even if we could just get those people together and you start to create like some traction for those ideas, there's a lot of people who want to get involved. Yeah. There's just not a whole lot of people who want to get involved at the same time, right? True. So, I mean, I respect people who don't want to. That's fine. And you don't need, if you don't want to, that's a choice. It's an active choice, right? I don't want to be involved, and that's okay. But what we're talking about here is the opportunity to get involved, right? And if nobody's doing it, then it never gets done.
Or figuring out, like, if somebody wants to get involved, but they don't know how.
Right.
I mean, be able to connect with the proper resources to be able to then, volunteer or,
Right. And again, I mean, it's a larger social issue, I would argue, but part of that is just the isolation that comes from, whatever network, right? Whether it's, Facebook or Nextdoor or Instagram or whatever, it's never the whole, it's always just groups, right? And I just think that there's something that we can do there. I think that we can be purposeful in the way that we manage our community to help kind of overcome some of those modern issues, because they're first world problems, but they are problems.
So how are you going to promote the engagement and the openness?
I would say that the city has done admirably a better job as the last 7 years have gone by, right? That was a very pronounced issue when I first got here. It didn't exist. I think it's from my perspective, there was nothing there, right? And what was there was just, it was antiquated. It was, the idea and the way that things were being approached were just not in line with what was happening with the city, right? They just and there's lots of reasons for that, right? It's not anybody's fault. I'm not saying it's overtly, a nefarious, we don't want to talk to anybody, that I don't think that was the case. So the city, I think, has done a better job, and the city engages more openly and more actively. And I know that there are new people on staff who are going to continue to address that, right, and make that more apparent to the people who live here. But again, I would argue that that needs to be purposeful, right? Right. Posting on social media every day that's not the answer. That's something you can just do, right? And like, okay, you have to be purposeful. It has to be thought out. It has to be intentional. It has to be holistic, right? Far too often, I think we take the approach, and it's a common problem in marketing, and it's a common problem in business, is that you take an approach based on the immediate audience that you're aware of, and you don't think about the audience that you can't see, right? Like a simple thing would be like, do we have communication that is in multiple languages, right? Are we reaching out to multiple communities? Are we making an assumption that everyone, can read and speaks English, right? And it's a fair assumption. I mean, there's people who would argue that, hey, if you live in the United States, English is the language that's most commonly spoken. That's what you should do. And I don't necessarily disagree with that, but I also say, you know what? We also have to be aware of the fact that there are some people who don't, right? And they may be very talented people. They may be subject matter experts. And if we're not trying to reach out to them and let them know that they have a seat at the table, then they're never going to come, right? So that would be part of it, right? That would definitely be, I think we're on the right track. I think there's things that are being done now that are positive. We just need to continue that. We need to continue in that vein, and we need to really look at that and say, how can we do better here? How can we be more efficient? How can we be more purposeful in what it is that we're doing with these mechanisms, right? And then just ease of use, just making it easy for people to find stuff, right?
Yeah.
Whether that's, SEO or some sort of, data analysis that we're doing to make sure that we're seeing where people are coming from, and we're pushing our messages to those channels to where, kind of the opposite of what I'm talking about, right? Like that's what the environment is. So how do we make sure that our messages are getting out in those environments so that we can use those environments to overcome the problems that those environments are actually starting, right? And that's a big lift. That's not easy.
And I deal with analytics all the time with with websites, trying to figure out, where's the traffic coming from, what are they doing, and why aren't they doing what we want them to? So
Right.
let's figure out how we can fix it and make changes so that these, traffic patterns change and, for the better.
Yeah, and again, you don't want to necessarily look at it strictly from a business perspective. Business perspective being a little bit different than governance, in my opinion.
Sure.
In business, it's very much about how do we make them change to where they're doing what we want them to do, right?
And maybe that's a poor
No,
choice of
but
words
it's
for,
not. It's not, because I think it brings up a very valid point, because a lot of people will look at it that way, right? And they'll say, hey, you know what? This is how we would do it because we want people to do these things. And I'm like, well, you know what? Governance and public service from a city, municipality perspective, it's not about making people do things the way that you want them to do it. It's about providing them the information where they're going now, right? So that they do become aware.
Yeah.
Because it can be that one message, it can be that one post, it can be that one website, whatever it happens to be. If the individual looking for that piece of information finds it, they will tell somebody else where it is. And then that person will tell two more people, and then that person will tell two more people. And then all of a sudden, you have a huge group of people, hundreds of people, who now know where to go get the information, right?
This is the good kind of pyramid scheme that we want.
Yeah, right. Well, I'd never thought about it as a pyramid scheme
Well, you're
before.
talking about, this person brings in two people, and
you're
those two people
right.
bring two more.
No, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. It's more of it's something that I would say, from my personal experience, I would say that's a hospitality thing, right? I did a long stretch in the hospitality industry, and one of the things that we would always talk about, I mean, there's obviously we do advertising, and you do things when you're in the hospitality industry to get people to come to your hotel or to your restaurant, whatever, right? But it was always about being aware of how people were talking about those things, right? Because we knew that the word of mouth was just as powerful as the actual advertising.
Yeah.
If that one person comes and has a good experience at your restaurant, they're going to tell somebody that they had a good experience, or two people, and those two people are going to come. And if you can make sure that you continue that customer service at a level that everybody has a similar, if not exact same type of experience, the word gets out, right?
We call that the referral engine.
That's the referral engine. Yeah. Absolutely. 100%. And that's what we want in Leander. I mean, we're growing. There's nothing we can do about that. It's going to grow. Some people may not like that, and some people are going to say, I really want things to stay the way they are. Well, That's not possible because that ship has already sailed, right? That we're already well into the progress of moving the city forward, and it'll look different in 5 years and 10 years, and eventually we'll get to a point to where there'll be 150, 250,000 people living in 39 square miles, and they're all going to want to have a good quality of life, and that's what we need to be talking about today because we want to ensure that that happens.
Yeah. Now, one of the, I guess, near and dear to my heart is businesses. Because businesses, they drive the communities. Leander is growing very fast, but it's mostly on the residential end that's really growing.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that, as a business owner in Leander, and, there are a lot of things that Leander is either not doing or could be doing better to support business growth. And how would you, how would you handle that? What is your vision for
I think
businesses?
you're hitting on another really good topic, and it's definitely something that we've thought about. When I was on the Economic Development Committee, we talked about these types of subjects, right? Like, what can we do to entice business to come to Leander? And that's the key, right? You want to entice people, the businesses, to make those investments. Small businesses, medium businesses, even to a certain degree, large businesses. They have to have the impetus to come here in the first place, right? What are the reasons that they're coming here? Are they coming here because they have a workforce? They're coming here because there's economic growth opportunity. They're coming here because they have an educated workforce. They're coming here because there is a financial incentive for them to be here because the people who are living in the area have a expendable income, whatever. And there's again a lot of factors. The city again here has done, I think, an admirable job of adjusting and making some decisions over the past few years to put us in a position that we're doing a better job of that now, right? You see a lot of the development, retail type development going up and around, even right here on Hero, and if you go up a little bit, one off of 183A, you see it. Like, you see the development. There's the new commercial space on Hero, right? Which, when you look at that commercial space, I think it's C1 is the classification. It's ready for business to move in, right? You can come in, you can set up your shop, whatever it is that you're going to do there. And then that benefits the city's tax base because now you're not so reliant on just residential, right? I would caution that we would need to be very careful about not over-indexing to service-oriented businesses. The pandemic taught us a lesson, and service orientation. While again we talk about those conveniences and stuff like that. Those are the essential businesses from that perspective. And if you have too many in one particular sector for your tax base, if anything impacts that one particular sector, then your entire tax base feels the impact of it, right? Right. A lot of businesses closed during the pandemic, and they were, restaurants and small businesses because they just couldn't make it through that particular disruption. Which is not to say that we couldn't have another disruption similar to that or something else. But if you have a diversified tax base, which is really what you want to try to do, you're able to withstand the ebbs and flows of the marketplace and whatever popular demands might be, right? Things shift over time. My favorite pizza place used to be Shakey's Pizza. There's not even I think there's one or two Shakey's pizzas left in the whole country, and they were everywhere, right? So things change, right? Over time, things will change, and we've got to be aware of that. We know it happens, and so how do you plan for that, right? But as far as supporting local business, I think we need to take every initiative that we can to ensure that we make ordinances as easy as possible to navigate. We don't need to create additional barriers to having businesses start their business, run their business, advertise their business, etc., right? It's always interesting to me, and I think there's a perfect example, that one commercial space that I referred to there off of Hero, right? Large it's really set up for,
Talking about
small.
those concrete
Yeah, yeah,
monstrosities
yeah,
down
yeah.
the
Yeah, I wouldn't
down the
necessarily
road.
call them monstrosities, but they're commercial development. It's
Yeah,
commercial space, right? It's concrete, and so you can put in dividers, and you can have multiple businesses in there, and that's what you want,
yeah,
right? But I think it's super interesting, and the reason I bring it up is because there's a badminton facility in that business a bit park, right?
I had no idea.
Most people don't. Like they drive by and they see the little logo or whatever. And I've had a lot of people ask me, well, what is that? And honestly, I
Yeah,
didn't know until I stopped and found out. But it's interesting because it's not what I would have expected for that
yeah,
space, right? I look at that space and I'm thinking, I don't know, maybe a My Spectrum shop or something along those lines. That's typically what you're going to see there. More of a commercial or mid-sized business, maybe an auto repair or auto parts or something like that, right? That's my
sure.
expectation. Again, speaking strictly for myself, I don't know anything that I don't know what's going in there. So if any of that actually happens, it's honestly
You don't
just
know what you don't know.
it's just a
Yeah,
guess. I was like, that's kind of what I think would go there. But I was really interested to find out that it was this badminton facility, right? And it's I don't want to guess wrong, but I want to say it has something like 18 or 24 courts in there. It's a lot, and they are full all the time. Again, what we were kind of alluding to earlier is like that's somewhat community specific, right? There's a large Indian community in Leander now, and a lot of the Indian culture has a different perspective on sporting and badminton as a sport, right? So they train differently. They
yeah,
approach the sport differently, right? You and I probably play it on weekends at the picnic because someone had a net and a couple of rackets,
yep,
right?
yep,
We're not experts by any stretch, but there's people who take that sport very,
yeah.
very seriously.
That and cricket. I think we actually
Yeah,
have a cricket
cricket. Yeah.
facility
Again,
right next to our neighborhood.
I can tell you from my experience, and again, this is lived. I worked with a soccer club. I still do in Cypress, Texas, and we used to. At one point, we had multiple fields. One of the fields was underused, and a cricket group came and approached us and said, could we take over your lease with the county because we want to build cricket fields? And we're like, I tell you what, we'll split it with you if we can configure the cricket fields in such a way that we can continue to use that field for soccer when we need to, right? And initially, that's what we did. I mean, we just configured it to where we could have little soccer fields, small soccer fields for the little kids, and they could play cricket, right? And eventually, they took it over altogether. But that was an early indication of, okay, this is a change, right? This is
Right.
something that's coming in, and it's not from a community that I necessarily engage with on a daily basis, but they have different needs and different wants and different desires, but they all have to live within the same community.
Yeah.
Again, that's kind of my point at the end of the day. It's like, look, we got a lot of different people with a lot of different ideas. All of them are probably pretty good.
Yeah.
Let's figure out a way to get most of them done.
Yeah. No, and I think that's great. I think, and I, I'm kind of afraid to open this can of worms, but I know one of the issues, and especially Scott likes to talk about it a lot, is the sign ordinance in
Yeah,
Leander.
no, I've heard that
Um,
pretty much for 7 years.
and that makes it hard for me. Like technically, like I can't put some nice window clings on, my studio to advertise my studio. So,
Right.
how are people supposed to find me? You said, the badminton court didn't really have much of a signage for
Right.
it.
Right.
How are people supposed to know that we're here if we can't properly put out signs?
Yeah, no, I think it's a very, very real issue, right? Um, what I know of that, and I'm not an expert, right? But what I know of that is that a lot of what was done originally with the sign ordinance or ordinances were designed to manage that in a way that was aesthetically pleasing, which I think is a good idea,
Sure, yeah.
right? But I think over time they just became too onerous,
Yeah.
right? They're just too hard to navigate, and it takes too much time. And some of that is staffing, some of that is approval process and whatnot. So I know that the city is working to address a lot of that type of stuff. But I think it's reasonable to do a forensic review of our ordinances. I know that the long-term planning, I forget what it's called, is coming up here pretty soon. And so I think there's going to be some opportunities here in the short term, which kind of brings up the topic of this election being really more important than what a lot of people might think it is, right? Because we have two incumbents who have stepped out, and we'll have two open races. And it's important that the people who are elected to those positions have an understanding of some of these topics already and come in with some knowledge. Again, I'm not a subject matter expert here, but it is a topic that I've discussed. I think I even did a podcast on it. So it is something that I'm familiar with, and I know that it's a pain point for businesses. So how can we eliminate that pain point? At the end of the day, it's really important to understand that, again, what you would do as a city council is budget and ordinance, and budget is largely influenced by the taxes on the participants in the community. And if businesses are more easily able to do what they need to do to create businesses, that's what we should be looking at, because people should be able to, you should be able to make some money and make your way in the world and in business without any kind of tailwind. Or actually, the city should provide tailwind, and not headwinds.
Headwind, yeah. No, lower the barriers.
Lower the barriers to the degree that we can. Now, we still have to keep an eye out towards the long-term development and the long-term planning, right? That's the balance.
Yeah.
And that's the trick, right? That's the trick. It's not as easy as a lot of people will make it out, especially when you get people who will really concentrate on one particular issue. And it's like, that one issue maybe.
But there's a lot of other things.
But there's a lot of things that go into, it's like making gumbo. There's a lot of flavors in there.
Yeah, so I guess taking a measured approach is the best way to go.
Measured, but again, you still have to have an idea of what it is that you're trying to do, right? I think that sometimes you get caught in the trap of making too measured of an approach, and you're only dealing with what you see in front of you and not really necessarily. Zoom out is one of my favorite terms. Like, I use it all the time. Like, let's zoom out. Let's look at the bigger picture here, right? Because I think that's an important way to approach things more holistically. You're not going to be able to solve every problem every time, but if you're taking into account as many things as you possibly can, you do a better job of solving the problems that you do solve.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. I think we're just about running out of time for the day, but I appreciate you coming in down here today and talking with me and putting up with my questions.
No, I appreciate you taking on the responsibility and the task, right? Yeah. You did a great job.
Yeah, it was a little scary at first, but I got into it. So
right. No, I think you did a really good job. And I'm very, very happy that you've agreed to take on that role. Because as I mentioned earlier,
You're
I think
happy now, but just
let's see how it goes. The ratings are going to be terrible. No. No, I think it's great. I really do appreciate you taking that step, and hopefully it helps you in figuring out what you want to do. Because I know we talked about that earlier, or last time we talked. Mm-hmm. Eventually you want to have your own little thing.
I'll
going
figure
on
out.
here.
I'll have to ask ChatGPT what I should have a podcast about, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, let the robots decide. No, but I appreciate it, and great job. I appreciate you kind of keeping holding the torch as it may be, because. I don't think it's appropriate for me to be in that seat while I'm running. So
no, this is kind of a cool opportunity, and I appreciate being able to do this.
Awesome. Well, it was my pleasure to be here, and usually the host would toss as the vernacular is, and so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to assume the toss here. You can find information on my candidacy. My website is votenaudin.com. And Naudin is spelled Naudin. And if you need a little memory tool for that one, it's like the car Audi with an N on either side. And that's an easy way to remember my last name. So if you pronounce it Naudin, if you pronounce it Naudin, or any other variant therein, it's okay. You know me, and hopefully I get to know you. So you can find that information, votenaudin.com, and then our various socials will all be some variant of that. Most of them will obviously have Naudin in there. It's either Elect Naudin or Vote Naudin, something along those lines. So engage as much as you'd like. You can reach me directly via email on the website. There's a direct phone number that we have for the campaign. And I'm looking forward to having a couple of functions here in the near term. We'll kind of be advertising that and making sure people know. Feel free to stop by, come meet me, ask me any questions, tell me what it is that's important to you, and I'll definitely have an ear to listen to you because I like to lean in, Leander.
Wah, wah, wah. All right. Well, thanks again, everybody. I'm happy to be here. This is, again, my first time hosting for Lean and Leander, and I'll see you guys next time.
All right. Thanks, Morgan.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.